Welcome to the Alberta Prosperity Project Podcast. If you're ready to listen, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Thursday, September 8th, 2022. Welcome to episode 17 of the Alberta Prosperity Project Podcast. I'm your host, Hunter, today, joined today with Tanner, who again has a new background. Tanner, where are you located today?
A new background, that's entirely correct. I'm actually out in BC. Mom and Dad decided to take a little vacation. I decided I'd tag along because I have family out here. And so we're kind of I don't actually know exactly where we are. I get mixed up here pretty easily, but I think it's Okanagan in some area, I think. Anyways, it's nice, it's hot, it's a little overcast this morning, but on the whole, it's been a phenomenal week so far, and we're excited. Yep.
Yeah, can't complain about that. Obviously, that ties in nicely to where the podcast will be going a little bit later here after I talk a bit about Saskatchewan as well. But I think that maybe you're there also, maybe perhaps for the Liberal Summit. I'm not too sure if that's the case. Obviously, the closing day of that, maybe that's why you went to BC. I'm not too sure.
I am not here for the Liberal Summit. Oh, the one that's going on. The Cabinet's having a summit in Vancouver, right? Is that where it is?
I think so. That's yes.
Yeah. No, you and I were not invited to the summit, which to me is so confusing.
It is.
I can't figure out why we weren't, especially since, and of course, APP is nonpartisan, nonprofit. Yeah. Not political and so on. But so confusing, don't you think? I wonder why our group was not invited out to that summit. It's the strangest thing.
Yeah, especially being nonpartisan, of course. I mean, we could have given them lots of helpful hints. We've got, obviously lots of experts on the team, so I'm surprised that they wouldn't have done that. But other than that, hope everyone had a great long weekend. As some people know that had watched the last podcast or listened to the last podcast, I was in Saskatchewan a bit. I couldn't get over, A, the number of crickets, and B, how dry it was. It was just something, like out of a movie. It was crazy. Lots of dust, but it was still a nice little getaway, and so we can't complain about that. But how was your long weekend?
Yeah, it wasn't bad at all. Well, we were too busy talking to you to hear if you had hit anything in the combine. Did you go in the combine? You know
what? Didn't even do that. I went into the grain truck with a hired hand and a family member, but the combine was hardly able to pick anything up. They were the crops were so short this year from how dry it was, and down in southern Saskatchewan they weren't even going yet, so wasn't able to take a trip then. But who knows? Maybe you and I will have to go out there again sometime a little bit later when they're combining some oats or something, and take a few videos and maybe even do a podcast from there. So
that'd be fun. That would be fun. That's a good idea.
So
not
we
bad.
will see.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea.
See how the year progresses for them. Obviously, I have heard some farmers are doing quite well, and that's awesome to hear. But again, now moving, I guess, sort of into the episode a little bit, and that is obviously, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, this Liberal Summit and everything that's going on. They are here. This is their last day now today. They're going to be wrapping things up a little bit and have been discussing, some ways in which they can make Canada a better place and how they can help tackle some of our greatest issues that we're facing right now. And so, even though you and I weren't invited, perhaps some Liberal parliamentary members will be watching this podcast and they'll want to know maybe some other ideas, perhaps. I don't know. So I guess we'll find out if that's the case. But there's been some big news recently. The Bank of Canada obviously hiking interest rates again yesterday. That's been a big piece of the pie. Inflation. They're looking at doing all these things. So I think we should maybe just go through a list of a few of their topics, and maybe you can give some feedback and some advice on what you would recommend if they would have invited us there. So starting first, we'll maybe touch a little bit on affordable housing, interest rates, inflation. Obviously, you're in BC. Housing is quite not affordable there, it seems, right now. That's across the country. What would you do as a recommender to the Liberal Party on how to solve that crisis?
Right. So we wanted to do this podcast, this idea, because, you're correct. The Liberals are having they're just finishing this summit on affordability. They're holding it in Vancouver. And we figured, well, since we're nonpartisan and we give quote unquote advice to all political parties, why not do it with this one too? Now, with regards to housing. So housing is expensive, and you know that. Right, especially since you're just married, and I don't know if you're looking for a house, are you, or no?
With current house prices, not at the moment. It's be nice for the smoker, but right now it's and rates keep on going up. So I'm thinking, no, we better let it sit for a little bit.
It's pricey. It's so pricey for a house, and you're right. That's across the country. Of course, some cities are more expensive than others, and some cities are more inflated than others. Right, Toronto and Vancouver and Calgary, even though it's supposed to be this cheap, massive city, it's still expensive. So you have all of these expensive housing prices all across the country, and one of the topics, it sounds like, excuse me, of of this summit, of this Liberal summit, was how do you get the housing price down, right? How do you make housing affordable? So what are our recommendations? Well, the first thing you have to do is quite obvious. You have to stop printing money. Like when you print, we talk about this all the time, and you have to talk about it all the time because it's so prevalent. It is it's the base problem, in my opinion. When you print all of this money itself is worth less than it was the day before. And so as home builders, etc., you have to raise the cost of housing in order to reclaim the amount of value that you put into it, right? If today you have $2 in the economy, yesterday you had $1, you're going to have to raise the price of plywood in order to recapture the value that it actually costs to put up that plywood in the house. So you have to stop printing money. Now, I realize for any government, that's a big ask, right? Governments don't like to stop printing money because when you do it, it's like cutting off a man's supply of alcohol in the middle of a party, right? He'll go back home, he'll be upset, he'll sleep, he'll have a hangover. Doesn't feel so good. But you have to do it in order to become sober again. And so that's the very first thing they should be talking about is stopping printing or stop printing money, right? Stop printing money. That's the first thing. But you also have to stop giving out homes to anyone and everyone. Like, you know, and that sounds like a harsh thing to say, and maybe it is, but it's true. If you're 18 years old or 19 years old, you can't be enabled to walk into a bank and say, I want a loan for $900,000 to purchase a home, right? That's nonsense. Now, you know, there are obviously exceptions to the rule, and no one should, you know, not like the government should put a handcuff on those individuals. No, it should be simply that the banks have to know, right? The big banks have to know that if they give out a loan that's risky and that person defaults on said loan, the government can't be allowed to bail them out, right? Like you have right now, all of these loans that are being handed out left, right, and center, or you did at variable rates, right? These low prime rates to just about anybody, because banks know that if they default, government will somehow bail them out. Or somehow all the issues will just go away, right? But when you do that, of course, you introduce this. It's like lying investment. Basically, it's an incorrect picture of the investment frame in the entire economy, right? So instead, what you have to do is you have to cultivate a system, and our opinion is that this system will only be cultivated in an independent Alberta, where banks know that government will not bail them out if they default on loans or if customers default on loans, because then you wouldn't have, you know, people handing out mortgages to guys who are 19 and have $1,000 sitting in their account, right? Or you wouldn't have at least the massive mortgages, right? You wouldn't see that because banks know that it's a risky, or if you did, the rates would be through the roof, right? It's a risky investment. They know that there's a high probability that they're going to default, and as such, they won't give out the mortgage, and the housing price will then come down. It will reflect that accordingly, right? Because you can't, you know, a lot of guys wouldn't be able to buy a house then, and so the market itself would totally change. Now, this thing about interest rates, right? Like, so the interest rates rose. What did they rise yesterday?
75 basis points, 0.75%.
Right. Okay. I always get confused how those basis points work. It's 100 basis points is 1%. Is that what it is?
Yes.
Okay. So at any rate, so they rise 0.75% yesterday.
Yeah.
So now the prime rate is?
Now we are one of the highest in the developed nations, and I believe that what would that put it at? It was at 3.7.
Okay.
And so by another 0.7, you'd be at almost 4.4%.
Is it high? Is that what it is? Well, you want to double check?
Yeah.
Just check
look
quick.
that up. No.
We're just checking what the interest rate is. Usually we get this info before, but today I forgot.
Right. Yeah, it's up to 4.7 now.
Okay. So the rates are high. Okay. Yeah. So the wow, what's the word when you want to validate something? The justification the bank gave for raising interest rates is to cut back on inflation, or they want to bring down inflation.
Yeah.
But there are nations that have wicked high inflation and wicked high interest rates. Like talking like double-digit interest rates and double-digit inflation, right? Like the way you cut back on inflation is to stop, as I mentioned, stop printing money. The bank has to call in the money. They have to call in the cash. They have to go to government and say, time to pay up. You can't keep printing money in order to get your government bonds, or in order for us, you can't keep printing money by giving us government bonds. We want the bonds repaid now, and we want them with cash that is not printed from us. That's how you have to destroy it, right? The high interest rates, they'll discourage big spending on big assets. That's true. right? Guys are already pinched, and they're really going to be pinched now if they had a variable rate on their mortgage, right? People are in trouble because that's a big hike, and then more hikes are coming. So it will discourage spending on massive assets, right? And that asset inflation is that's really where we saw a lot of that spending go, right? With quantitative easing and everything. All that really is just, that's a complicated topic. That's a topic for another day, the quantitative easing and how governments or excuse me, how banks put money into reserves or out of reserves, et cetera. But on the whole, that quantitative easing revealed itself in the asset markets, in the big housing markets. Right. And so the prices rose. As you raise interest rates, less people will be able to afford a home. They won't buy a home, right? And those who are already in a mortgage will start feeling this massive pinch. So, I think the justification for raising interest rates is suspect. I mean, I understand. From a political standpoint, I certainly understand it, and it will bring down the asset inflation because guys won't be. Well, the asset price inflation is more accurate. People won't be buying as many homes, and so the demand for homes is decreased. That demand curve has shifted to the left, and as a consequence, as it goes down on the graph, housing becomes less expensive, right? Because the demand has shifted, so it's not it's not as expensive. Now, that also does not bode well for those who already have houses or want to sell their houses, right? The way a housing market bursts, it's not like the stock market, right? And I know. And I'm sure the listener knows that the stock market ruptures like it just pops, like a balloon with a needle, right? It just goes bang. One day it's up here, the next day it's, oh boy, down here, right? You saw it with the crypto markets, all this stuff. When the market ruptures, it ruptures hard and fast. And sometimes out of nowhere. The housing market is not the same. When the housing market ruptures, it's more like a slow leak in a tire, or it's like untwisting the balloon. You don't hit it with a needle, you just let the air leak out of it. And so it slowly leaks out of the market, and that balloon becomes smaller and smaller and smaller until one day you wake up and you realize that the balloon is totally deflated or that the tire is off the bead, right? One morning you wake up and you realize your house is worth half of what it was a year ago. It's out of nowhere because there's no demand for it. Yeah. And with the interest rates rising, that is what's happening. Even the mainstream media is reporting that there is a decrease in housing prices, and there is, and it's a dangerous decrease. I read a report from TD, maybe we'll put it in the comments, that said that by early next year, they expect that housing prices will be 25% lower, I think, than what they are now, which is a massive drop in a very short amount of time. So, what you have to do to make housing more affordable, stop printing money. That's the first thing, and that's the most important thing. Don't give out mortgages to anybody and everybody. That is, let the banks know the government will not be bailing you out if you make a mistake. These egregious mistakes. And thirdly, let the interest rates work in a free market, right? These are the recommendations for an independent Alberta, right? We don't want government interfering. That's really the issue. Government interferes, and so the market becomes screwed up. And as a consequence, nothing is true. Everything seems to be this massive facade. And so the housing prices skyrocketed. Yeah. Right. So that's the first recommendation.
There we go. That's
to the Liberal government and the Liberal cabinet at their summit.
Yes. Well, if they are listening, there you go. You can, yes, if that wasn't the discussion points that you had, well, you might be on the wrong track right now. But moving forward, and one thing that the current government seems to be quite proud of and is very happy with is their job creation growth in numbers right now. It looks like jobs are being created at exponential rates right now. They're coming out of the pandemic with high job creation. So I guess with that said, they're looking at how they can keep on creating even more jobs than they are right now. And so what would be your recommendation on how to create more and more jobs for Canadians?
Well, do you have that statistic about the job creation over the last little while?
I do, about the one, what percent were government jobs and what were...
Yeah, can you read that?
Yeah, so they've actually netted over 420,000 jobs now. It's been almost 423,000, but of that, almost 367,000 of them were in the government sector. It was about an 86.7% ratio of the total jobs gained since the pandemic have been in the public sector, and there's only been about 56,000 net new jobs, from the private sector. So mostly, for sure, government jobs.
Yeah, so that's not good, right? Like, that's bad. That's like we're glad that people are earning money, but that's a smokescreen, right? That's a huge, huge smokescreen. We're creating jobs, and then we find out that almost 87% of them have been in the government, the public sector. Okay, so that's not good, right? That's bad. Like, okay, here's a question. So we have a, I think he'll listen. We have a great friend. You know,
Mm,
I'd love to say his name, but I don't know if he wants to be said. But you know
mm,
who he is. He lives in town.
mm,
We see him pretty often, Dad and
mhm,
I, and you when you're home too.
mhm.
You know who I'm talking about.
Yes.
Brilliant grader operator. You
Yeah.
know, he's just this old school, relaxed beauty, just a
Yeah.
true blue Alberta guy that you just love to hang out with. Nicest guy in the world, you know.
Yeah.
And he used to be a contractor, supervisor and stuff on the oil leases and everything.
Mm,
And
mhm,
now he just kind of works just casual when he wants to. He goes up north and he
mhm,
operates grader up in the camps, you know, and clears the roads and stuff just for,
mhm,
something to do. Anyways, he can push a lot of dirt in a little bit of time, right? And he makes those roads good and flat, right? They're nice. He's
yeah.
smooth. You just know he's smooth with it. You know that, if there's a guy that you want clearing roads, it's him kind of thing. Just
Mhm,
relaxed as anything. Now that's one job.
mm,
I've hired one job if I'm operating that camp.
right.
What if, and this is an old story by an old economist named Milton Friedman. What if
Mm,
instead I decided to take away that man's grader
mm,
and instead I gave them old stone boats
mm,
to level out, the road? And you
mhm,
load up a team of horses, 2 horses per stone boat, let's say, and you get a bunch of guys with horses and stone boats to try and level out a road, right?
mhm,
I can instead create 10 jobs.
right.
Say I have 10 stone boats. Do I want to do that?
Mm. Yeah.
Right?
Not as efficient, but
No, of course not.
yeah.
Okay, so you can, but like you
Mhm,
go even farther. Suppose you have a guy operating a cat
mhm,
and he's pushing dirt for an oil lease, or maybe he's reclaiming an oil lease. Who knows? Whatever. He's pushing dirt, and
mm,
those cats push a lot of dirt, right? They
mhm,
burn some diesel, a lot of torque, push forward. You know, they move earth. It's cool.
mhm,
I
mhm,
think it's so cool. Anyways, you can do that, or you can hire 1,000 men with spoons to
mm,
do the job. Take a spoon and start.
mhm.
It's so comical, but this is
Yeah.
honestly what the government's doing,
Yeah.
right? You can take some spoons and start digging dirt, right, to
Mhm,
move it the way. Like you can do one or the other. You can hire 1,000 men, do
mhm,
that job, and create 1,000 new jobs, and have all the
mhm,
fanfare that the media gives it. Or you can hire one man with a cat
mhm,
to do it in an hour, kind of thing.
mhm,
So which do you do,
mhm. Well, I'd go with
right?
the cat if I was a business
Yeah, of
person, that's
course.
for sure. And
Right. So,
yeah.
right. So, what I would advise the government is I would
Mhm,
say job creation actually isn't the goal. That's the
mm,
wrong goal, right?
mm,
What we really want are efficient jobs.
mhm,
We want efficient jobs so that we can be a society that's as efficient as possible. The reason we want that is because the more efficient society is,
mm,
the more well off it is. This is an
mhm,
old principle. It's called the Pareto principle, right?
mm,
It's one of you learn it in, I don't know, maybe introductory and a
mm,
bit into the mid-level economics, right?
mm,
We like Pareto efficiency. We want it because when
mhm,
you're efficient, and I'll try and be simple with the explanation. It's a little complicated, but I think it makes intuitive sense. When you're efficient,
mm,
people are as happy as they can be. And again,
mm,
I'm oversimplifying. What I
mhm,
mean is if you gave them the option to say switch jobs,
mm,
they wouldn't do it, right? If you gave an individual the opportunity to go to this job or that job or a different job
mm,
versus the one they have now, and they don't, then that means that they are most content being where they are and they're
mhm,
most efficient doing what they're doing.
mhm,
And so if they were to move
mm,
jobs, it would decrease their well-being, it would
mhm,
decrease their enjoyment, etc. And as such, the society on the
mm,
whole wouldn't be as well off as it otherwise could be.
mm,
So I could give, or you could give, or the government could give 1,000 men and women
mhm.
jobs digging a ditch with a spoon,
Right.
right? You could do that, but that's not efficient. That
Mm,
takes those 999 men, because you want to keep one for the cat, for the
mhm,
dozer, or for the digger, whatever you want to use.
mhm.
That takes them away from other jobs that are
Right.
more efficient and more productive,
Mm,
which increase our total well-being. So
mm,
my advice to the government is stop involving yourself in the market. Your
mhm,
job is not to create jobs. Your job is instead to act as a referee.
mm,
Let the market create the efficient jobs that exist only in the private market,
mm,
right? You look at what a bureaucrat gets done versus what a private sector individual gets done.
mhm,
Maybe the two are, they might even be the same work ethic. They might even possess the same work ethic. It's just that the bureaucrat is literally bogged down by bureaucracy and the private sector individual isn't. And
mhm,
there's a vast discrepancy about what the two can get done in a day, just
mm,
as a consequence of their working environments, their
mhm.
relationships, et cetera, right?
Right.
Government doesn't work for profit, supposedly, whereas the free market does. right? So the advice is get out of the job market, let the private sector create the jobs. The only position or purpose of the government is to act as a referee to ensure that an individual is not being harmed unduly, wrongly by someone else, right? If you have, for example, a shop owner that abuses his or her workers, then quite rightly, the government ought to get involved and shut down that shop and take that owner to court, right? That's the purpose of government, not to create jobs. So that's the second point. It's so strange. I can't believe that they did not invite APP to this summit. I can't believe it.
That's exactly right. Yes. And while we certainly could go on to a long list of topics, I want to finish off with one that they seem to be, quite concerned about and very focused on trying to solve and tackle the issue of. And that is, the listeners have heard it before. Canadians have heard it before, whether they watch the news or are politicians, and that is climate and affordability and how the two work together and how we can, increase the surplus of the climate and make sure that we ban harmful plastics and all these things that they're saying that they're doing for us. So how do those two work together? Can we, maybe eliminate our oil and gas and, move over to solar and wind? As we know, it was 2 degrees Celsius here in Red Deer this morning, so that would be quite well received, I'm sure. But what is the solution for the climate and affordability?
Well, do you have a solar panel on your deck yet?
I don't. Maybe I should put it on. They don't really have a smoker, but maybe I should get a solar panel
maybe
instead.
You should. I don't have one either. Okay, so banning oil and gas, right? I just purchased, I'm so excited to read it, this book. And we're not paid, of course, this is, we're totally nonprofit, but this is a book called Fossil Future. I know it's probably, will it be reversed on the screen?
It might be. I can see it well, though. You can tell it's
so it's called Fossil Future.
Yeah.
It's by a guy named Alex Epstein. He has another book called The Moral Argument for Fossil Fuels, I think. I've read that one. I haven't read this new one, but this new one looks great. I'm so excited about it. And basically, the crux of his argument is that you need fossil fuels in order to achieve the highest standard of living possible. He says, I want you to look at a country that doesn't have fossil fuels versus a country that does have fossil fuels and look and see if the two countries are at all comparable in their standard of life, and they're not. Now, you and I know, and the audience knows, that correlation doesn't imply causation. Fair enough. But he presents a solid enough argument in his books to prove that indeed there is a correlation. And you can look at that intuitively and know it. It's winter coming up, right? Yeah. I don't like it. You don't like it. I don't think a lot of people like it, but coming up is winter. And do we suppose that our lives would be better or worse with or without oil and gas? It's so silly a question to even ask. It's like, you look at I did a study on how much power plants that run on natural gas and coal produce, versus power plants, I'm using that term, that run on solar or wind produce. And the difference is phenomenal. There's a massive difference. The amount of wind turbines that you need to have to produce the same amount of power as one natural gas power plant is astonishing, right? But not only so, you have to look at all the variables too, right? Like power is a very finicky market, right? Insofar as, okay, so suppose that you use 1 megawatt of power every day. It's a lot of power, but suppose that you did so because, you're super cold one day and you want to stay toasty warm. Okay.
Yeah.
So you use 1 megawatt of power. If you take a megawatt of power out of the grid to consume it, you can't just say, well, it's gone, right? You have to immediately inject 1 megawatt of power back into the grid, into the power lines. And I'm oversimplifying, but it's true, right? Yeah. If you take a bucket of water out of the pond, you have to put a new bucket of water back in. The reason for that is because electricity works like a wave, right? I heard that light works like a particle and a wave, but anyways, right? Think of it like a wave, a sine wave, right? Now, if you change the amount of power that's in the grid, that wave will change and it'll change frequencies. Now, that's a problem because if you plug in your iPhone or your Samsung or your tablet, whatever it is, into the wall to charge, and the wrong frequency is coming through that outlet, it'll fry the device. Right? It'll completely screw up the electronics and everything will be ruined with your toaster or your microwave or who knows what, right? All that stuff will be ruined. So you have to keep that wave at the exact same frequency all day and all night. And that doesn't matter if you're using 10 megawatts of power, if you're using 1 megawatt of power, if you're using no power, you have to keep that wave the same. So the problem with wind and solar is that the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, right? You have to have this constant guaranteed supply of power in order to keep that wave the same. So for that reason alone, right, I'm not a proponent of banning oil and gas. It would be devastating. But then you look at even like the again, the power required. Oh, it's a massive difference. You think of how miraculous oil is. You can take 100 liters of gasoline and you can move a massive vehicle 600 kilometers, 6 hours away using just 100 liters of fuel, which is something like that's ridiculously small. There's so much power and energy stored in that it's it's unthinkable to remove it, right? It's unbelievable to even consider removing it. You look at, again, the difference in the quality of life, right? We can heat our homes. We can go to the hospital and we know that the lights are going to be on because those hospitals are powered by an electrical grid that runs off oil and gas. But what's the story in California right now?
Yeah, right? They're asking people to stop even charging their vehicles now. They're having major issues. Yes.
Maybe what? Is it maybe like, I don't know the actual figure, so we'll have to look it up, but is it maybe what, like 1% of Californians have an electric vehicle?
I think it's a bit more than that, but it's certainly not the 100% that they're aiming for.
Okay, so it's not even 50, it's not even 20% of owners have an electric vehicle, and the government is begging them to stop charging their cars because the blackouts are so bad, right? Because they don't have enough power. So that's a problem. Now think about it if you removed oil and gas. Oh, it'd be devastating. And then because this summit is about affordability, does anyone listening, or you believe that if you took away oil and gas, life would suddenly become more affordable?
No.
Yeah, like you might not pay anything because there'd be no power to have.
Yeah.
So that's not exactly ideal either. So what's our recommendation? Leave the oil and gas sector alone. Don't touch it.
Yeah.
Take away Bill C-69, take away C-48, let us drill for oil, let us ship the oil, let us burn the oil, right? You have all the scrubbers. I passed by that Sheerness power plant the other day, a little while ago. I was honestly astonished. I'd love to tour a power plant. Maybe you and I could do that. That'd be a lot of fun. I was astonished at how clean that was burning and how it was such a clean environment. It was so small in comparison to the vast swaths of land that turbines and solar panels take up, right? But it was producing so much more power. You have all these scrubbers on these machines. They burn it clean, all of these things. And yet still it's being hammered by these bureaucrats in office who want to completely eliminate or eradicate oil and gas, except for themselves, of course, because they like to fly, I guess, to Vancouver to hold a summit instead of having it in Ottawa. And it's nonsense. It's ridiculous. But I'd also recommend everyone read this book.
There you go.
Well, I haven't read this one yet. I know it's going to be good, though. But The Moral Argument for Fossil Fuels by Alex Epstein is just phenomenal. It's a brilliant, brilliant book. And I think everyone has to read it because it opens your eyes as to just how using fossil fuels, contrary to what bureaucrats say, is not immoral. Using fossil fuels is moral because it's conducive to human life, right? More people are alive today because of fossil fuels. The opposite is not true, right? The more, this idea that, by burning fossil fuels, we're creating more problems. What nonsense, right? It's the opposite. Humans solve problems, right? By burning fossil fuels, you enable the child to go to school and learn and and think for himself in order to actually fix the problems of the society. It's total nonsense that we're destroying society by burning fossil fuels. And anyone who dares claim such a thing or wants to stop or wants to, what's the proper word? Anyone who wants to handcuff, destroy your ability and my ability and the listener's ability to use fossil fuels in order to make the best for themselves and their families and enjoy the highest quality of life has to explain themselves. It's not for you and it's not for me to explain ourselves why we love to burn fossil fuels or why we not even love, why we do burn fossil fuels, right? It's up to them to do it because they want to make our standard of life lower than what it currently is. So a recommendation, get out of the oil market. Let the market work. Let us build pipelines. Let us build, new drilling capacity. Let us innovate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's the entire recommendation from the APP to government with regards to affordability? Get out of the market. Let the market work. Don't interfere with the market. Don't try and manipulate it to meet your political ends. I know that, and this is for any party, doesn't matter who it is. Let the market work, and it will produce a more efficient and fair and desirable outcome than anything that we're seeing right now. And what we're seeing right now isn't fair, efficient, or desirable, and it's only going to get worse. So that's our recommendation from APP.
Yeah,
Sealed and certified.
No, I must say, obviously, I'm not sure if they're going to take our recommendations, but if we want,
who knows?
We are happy to attend the next summit that they hold if they would like to get our input.
Yes, as a nonpartisan, we'd love to, Dr. Modry, our board,
that's right.
Any party for that matter.
Yes, we are extending. Yes, we are extending our willingness to come help you solve some of the issues that we're facing. But with that said, if you do want to get involved in the nonprofit, nonpartisan educational project that the APP is, I encourage you to go to our website. That's albertaprosperityproject.com. It's there that you can become a member and learn more about what we're doing to help educate all Albertans on exactly what is going on and what the solutions are to the problems that we face. As well, we're on social media, of course. That's your Facebook, your Twitter, your Instagram, YouTube as well. Be sure to subscribe to us there, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss a future episode. We love doing them, and always a lot of fun to do those. But with that said, Tanner, it was great doing this episode with you. Maybe go pass a hello on to the federal government before you leave BC, and we will see you next week.
See you later. Have fun.
Bye.